Hello, this is Chewing the Gristle. My name's Al Black, and my co-host is Tim Conroy. Hi, Tim.
My brother Al, how you doing?
It's great. We have a wonderful poet today. His name is M. Scott Douglas. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. M. Scott Douglas is originally from Pittsburgh and lives in Mint Hill, North Carolina. He is the publisher and managing editor of the Main Street Rag and Main Street Rag Publishing Company. Of his 6 poetry collections, Just Passing Through, Paycock Press 2017 is the most recent. His work has appeared in Midwest Review, North American Review, Asheville Review, Plain Song, and others. He has a degree in graphic arts from Central Piedmont Community College, where he also taught. Along the way, he's done construction and demolition, liking the latter better, spent 22 years as a dental technician, 12 years coaching basketball and baseball, 5 years as a bookstore owner and conference show promoter. He even bred rats for the University of Pittsburgh and wrestled a lion, a real lion. Welcome, Scott.
Like I said, happy to be here.
Could you tell us about your poetry journal? Who were your mentors? Who helped you get started and continues to help you along the path of poetry?
Wow. Well, we started out in 1994, and there was nothing in Charlotte at the time. And so we started, I started collecting literary journals from all over the country. I think Slipstream was one that was a big influence on what we wanted to do. But I mean, I have thousands of them. I would go and I had an allowance. I had about $40 a month I could spend on these things. And at the time you can get them for about $5 a pop. So I spent like 2, 3, 5 years collecting them. And I think Slipstream, like I said, was a big influence. Black Bear Review, which is no longer around, that was a big influence. Most of the ones that I was looking at were small independents. And then finally, about the time we were going to start our magazine, AJ Jelani came up with the Charlotte Poetry Review. And knowing what I knew about the Charlotte literary scene, I figured there's not enough room for 2 of us. So I helped him with his endeavor until he could no longer sustain it. He had this idea that he was going to give them away free. And I said, well, AJ, what happens when the bills come due? Because he was going to advertise in it. I said, you're not putting out enough that anybody's going to pay for advertising. So he said, well, then I'll put a price on it. I said, well, let me give you a piece of advice. Put a quarter on it. People will not buy what they used to get for free. But if you increase the price, they'll pay for that. Well, he didn't listen to me. And when the time came, he went under. And that's when we, me and a couple of my friends got together. I was basically the financier, how do you say it? So I was the bank. And it's not like I had a lot of money, but I knew what I wanted to do. My dad had been in printing, so I knew a little bit about design, and I'd done design work when I was younger and owned a bookstore. I had to do the advertisements for that. So I was the guy that got it going, and we just, as far as influences since then, we've had a few. I mean, Joy Harjo, I discovered her early on, and I just loved her work. Adrian C. Lewis, who's no longer with us, was somebody whose work I really admired. So when we started, and then there was a guy, his name was Ray Foreman, I think it was, and he was out in Colorado, and he owned this little press. And, when we were out in Colorado, we said, we're going to stop in to see Ray. Ray is out so far in the boondocks. I don't know how he could even produce anything. And he's, he was doing everything by hand. He was printing these sheets out and folding them and stapling them by hand. And it was amazing that he, you know, all the stuff that he did. He worked in like a 10 by 10 area, and it was incredible. But it taught me a lot there too. And I think that's where I discovered Adrian C. Lewis, because he and I were on opposing pages when he published me. But other than that, you know, it's just, you know, you go with the flow, you meet people. I go to the AWP, I go to different conferences, and I get to meet authors, and I get to meet other publishers. And, you know, I see what they're doing, and, you know, roll with the economy.
So on this journey, when did you get started on your journey with poet? I mean, you know, as a poet?
Well, that's going to freak a few people out. I was actually published as a poet the first time when I was 14. And, you know, and you go through different phases in your life. So when I was in high school, you know, I was getting published in a high school literary magazine. And then when I went to college, I got published in a couple of college literary magazines. But, you know, I was a pretty active guy. I was playing sports, and I had a job, and, you know, my time was really pretty precious. So, you know, you kind of drift in and out. You know, I'd write when I had time. And then, you know, right out of college, I got married, and I was dad. I was dad and coach. And so for about a decade, I didn't write much of anything. But when that marriage broke up, it was like, damn, I got all this material. So that was, you know, again, going back to the library, picking up what was being published at the time, and you know, and then starting to write my own, which was really bad, to be honest with you. I mean, even the stuff I wrote back in the 70s and 80s, bad. You know, I certainly wouldn't publish it if somebody sent it to me today.
Tim.
Scott, how would you describe your poetry style?
Well, it varies. I'm pretty much free verse. I have gotten into, you know, over the years, I'm not a big fan of forms. It all, especially when it comes out of my mind, it tends to sound forced. And you know, I'm not big in forced lines, forced rhyme. So you don't see much of that in the magazine when I publish it either. But recently, and with just passing through, you know, Keith Flynn is a friend, and Keith Flynn is one of the people that I talked to when I was, you know, working on this. Joseph Bathanti was another. And, you know, and one of the things I was really working hard on was the flow, the lyrical sound of the work. So I intentionally broke things up into quatrains, sometimes tercets, to try, and I was paying a lot of attention to the syllables and, you know, the line length in syllable count to make it flow a little more readily. And that was, you know, I think that's the evolution of my work. I think we're, you know, I'm not going to be doing forms in the future. I'm not a big fan of them, but I am going to be working on the flow and breaking it up in such a way that whatever I break it into, whether it's tercets, whether it's quatrains, whether it's, you know, 5-6 line stanzas, it's going to be a compact unit that works on its own.
No, that makes perfect sense after reading your poetry. And I wonder if you settled on kind of a favorite syllable count for your lines.
Yeah, I did. I have. You know, and I see this, you know, it's funny you ask that question, because, you know, here I am, I'm a publisher, so I'm getting other people's work that I'm trying to put into page length, and, you know, and they've got these lines that are like this long. And I'm trying, you know, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, page is this long. And I'm reading the line out loud. And to me, more than you can read in a breath is too long of a line. That's just my opinion. I know other people that, or maybe they just read faster than I do. So what I feel comfortable with is, getting back to the question you actually asked, I'm in the 8 to 12 syllables a line. I like that. Sometimes I end up at 7 and it feels really good. It really depends on what I'm writing, because when you get the sound of the work right, it writes itself in terms of how you break the line and how you read the poem.
Now you're in good company. Poets like Ron Rash, have a definite syllable count in his poems. So you're in
And his
great
stuff
company.
is so easy to read too, and I think that's part of it. I'm not saying that I write for the reader. I write for me, but I write for my own voice, and I know how my voice sounds better when I'm not trying to jam everything together.
And you touched on this a little bit, but when you're in that stage of first writing poetry, emerging as a poet, trying to get better, how do you? What advice would you give to the poet about working through mediocrity, trying to get better, and how do you get better?
Well, and I defy my own advice right here because I am an argumentative person, but you have to, when somebody goes and says, well, this doesn't work for me, instead of debating it with them, well, this is what I was trying to say. What you need to do is make a note there. And then you have to go back and see, okay, well, this didn't work for the reader. 9 times out of 10, if it didn't work for the reader, it's because I didn't present it. I was trying to be too fancy with the words, or I was trying to syllable count, whatever the case may be. I'm doing something that is distracting the reader, and that didn't work. So that just gives you a point where you have to go and sit down and rework it. I think, it's in this day of COVID, and of course there's a lot of Zoom readings and stuff like that, but during the pandemic, we don't have that time where we get together in these reading groups the way we used to, in the open mics and all that, because that's testing out at open mics is, I know a lot of people who are, if you want to use the phrase, established poets. They have this, I think, aversion from doing first drafts in front of an audience. Personally, I can look into the eyes of the audience and know whether it worked. And I can even see during, places where I'm expecting a reaction. If I don't see that reaction when I'm looking at somebody and while I'm reading it, I know they don't have to tell me that it didn't work there. I know that it didn't work.
And how about reading a few of your poems now?
Absolutely. Good time to take a drink, I guess. Okay, I got a couple here. These are all pretty fresh. A couple of them have been accepted, but none of them have been published. This one's called Cone of Uncertainty. And for those who do not know me real well, I do tend to lean toward the political. Some people enter your life like a hurricane, an angry deluge of bitter bluster, turn your home inside out, its contents scattered, mangled, blown up against your neighbors, or flushed out to sea on a twisting torrent of madness. They stay too long, and when they leave you nothing. They leave you stranded amid the clutter of a broken world, without so much as a wave goodbye. As if a lover had dumped you by tweet, spun the words out across the globe for all to see. In the end, you live with the consolation that you survived this oppressive storm, that its maniacal term came and went, a lonely blip on history's radar. And despite its most expansive efforts, Alabama had still been spared. Clothing for sale. Mostly shirts, like new, barely worn in over 3 years because I cannot wear red anymore. The color has been commandeered by lurid ideology, corrupted in ways that make me ashamed to be seen wearing it in public. Even certain shades of burgundy and pink are now suspect. though not abundant in this collection. I would donate them all to Goodwill, but I doubt anyone who shops there would be comfortable in them than me. And those who would shop for items like these need to pay a higher price. I'd like to sell them as a group. We'll accept best offer, but realize the market for them is quickly shrinking. I would turn them into rags, but the color is now so stained, I can't imagine anything it could clean.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Brother Al.
Okay. Talk to us about revision. How much do you revise, and is a poem ever finished?
I'm gonna answer the last one first. No, I don't think a poem is ever really finished. I mean, I have stuff that I published in my very first collection that was republished in an anthology, and as I was reading it, because we had this gathering at this conference, and as I was reading it, I was rewriting it the way I would write it if I had written it today. So no, I don't know that anything is done, because as we, we're artists, and as we evolve as artists, we look at things a little differently. I think the concepts that stay in and that start in my work in particular generally stays the same. But sometimes I look at the presentation, the language, and I say, could have done that a little better. It doesn't flow. Like I said, I'm working with language in terms of trying to make it flow better right now. And I look at how I wrote it then, and I'm like, damn, that is bad. So, how my process for rewriting. Okay. These ones that I am reading, most of them have not been published. Most of them are out there right now being considered. I perused them before I typed them out again, new, because I know me, and I looked at them, and 3 of them have been touched up, maybe a word here, a word there. It may only be 1 word, but it's still a rewrite. You read it aloud and you say, boy, that's a lot of syllables, or that's abrupt. I need to give something that makes that flow better. So yeah, I keep on my computer. I do all my writing on my computer. Well, not all of it. As you guys saw with Just Passing Through, I was actually a good portion of that was written while I was riding my motorcycle to Iowa and back, or to Kansas City and back, and I'd stop for the night, and I would just, I'm on the motorcycle. I don't have a headset or anything like that. I would just, I was inside my own head, and I was running through lines so that as soon as I broke, whether it was take a break to get gas or whatever, I'd write down lines, and then I'd work with them when I slept, or when I, stopped for the day. But I mean, as far as Just Passing Through and writing those lines, man, I would put a version on the computer, and then I would, every time I edit it, because I've got that little bit of Lynn Lifshin in me, where every rewrite's a whole new poem. So I started saving them, and there were some that I had like 24 versions of.
Okay. So I know you read a lot of folks because you're a publisher, but for you personally as a poet, who are you reading now, and who fuels your
my poetry
writing?
right now? I'm in a kind of a funk right now, because this whole political atmosphere is just it's made me a lot angrier than I would like to be when I'm writing. So you can get a feel for, I'm spending too much time with politics. I got to get away from that. Who am I reading now? Well, as far as reading out of a book, I'm not doing a lot of that lately. What I am doing is listening to a lot of audio tapes, and I am on book number, I think it's 14 or 15 of Craig Johnson's Longmire series. I'm a big fan of Longmire, and I liked the show when it was on, so we started getting the books. And I was at a Soki conference when I met him, And later on, somebody got me one of his books and had it, his first book, and had, and had it autographed for me. And I started reading it, and my time is so limited. When I want to start a novel, I can't just start it, and I have to finish. I want to get to the end. But I started reading his book, A Cold Dish, after the series had been canceled, and I'm like, wow, they really yucked up his characters. His characters are so much more rich in the books than they were on the show. And the storyline was a lot different too. So I like the books so much better than I like the show. And I really like the show. But that's who I've been reading out, as far as poetry goes. I'm not a big refresher. I mean, I'll buy books and then I read them one time and I may not go back to them, which is really bad. I should. But I'm reading mostly the authors that I'm publishing when it comes to poetry, because as I'm putting a book together, I'm editing and I'm cleaning it up and whatever. So that's mostly what I read.
Okay. Could you share a couple more poems with us?
Sure.
Great.
All right. This is my grandson. I'm going to give you a little forward to this. I don't usually like to do that. My grandson was having some anger issues, and I was exchanging with my ex-wife, who was telling me, how she always does, that anybody in the family who has bad attributes is just like me. So anyhow, she came up with this word that I heard it. And I'm like, I got to write that down. So that's the title of this poem. It's called Confrontagious. In a word, my ex had said it all, the instability of his disposition, a shared trait handed down from me through my son to my grandson. Only he's worse. As if we, my son and I, had refined and funneled our combined rage into a chromosomal assault weapon, able to blast away any and all anomalies, opposing or blending familial factors, distill a personality down to a solitary source of frustration. Or maybe she believes proximity to a super spreader dispersed in infection in search of a cure. More than anything, with a single word, she exposed the keystone to our continued lack of communication. This one's called Early Voting. It's really fresh, if you get my drift.
Yeah.
We arrived in the fading glow of overnight streetlights. A line at the door signaled that we were not the only anxious voters on this first day of early voting. I had considered camping out to be the first vote cast, but my wife wasn't on board for an all-nighter. By the time the gates swung open, the line had banked and stretched, social distancing more than 2 football fields long. People with walkers, canes, wheelchairs, people wearing masks, people packing resolve like a suitcase filled with a full day's necessities. In the schoolyard, beside the lined up waiters, a table of joyful Black women handed out flyers for Democratic candidates. On the other side of the line, Republicans stood with handouts butted up against a sign that read, "No campaigning beyond this point." An elderly white man in a red MAGA hat and no mask made several passes, offering a list of conservative judges. There were only a few takers. After the doors opened and we all moved toward the goal line, MAGA hat guy removed his jacket, revealing a t-shirt that proclaimed, "I'm one of the deplorables and unredeemable." I smiled at his shirt, realizing that progress had been made here today. An unnegotiated silent debate resolved, delivering us to that ever elusive political unicorn, common ground.
Let's hope we can find more common ground. Thank you.
Well, let's dig in a little bit, Scott, to your craft for a moment. And what are the poetic elements you tend to rely on? And what are the poetic elements you tend to not use?
Well, I don't use rhyme. I can tell you that. I mean, I'll use some internal rhyme, but mostly alliteration is something I like to play with. Hard consonant sounds is something that I use a lot, depending on what I'm working with. Flow, which I mentioned before. I'm trying to get a flow, and I do tend to use more iambic feet than anything else, because that's the way I talk. I'm not, when I'm reading something and I see something of the blah, 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 and I see like 3 or 4 flat syllables, to me, that line is a throwaway, because you've not made an impression on the reader, because you've not emphasized anything. You give me a whole bunch of junk words. So when I'm writing, I'm looking for that kind of intonation where I'm getting the stress on the syllables that I want. Beyond that, I mean, I'm a narrative poet as much as anything, mostly. So I'm just trying to instill flow and some kind of hard sound into the narrative that I'm trying to present without being too prosy. I mean, it's hard when you write free verse. If you don't concentrate on some kind of lyrical sound, you're going to end up just, you've got prose and short lines. And, and of course, I, like anybody else who writes mostly free verse, have been accused of that anyway, because it's all in the eye of the beholder anyway. But that's my goal. I have an image. And of course, the metaphors that I use are sometimes subtle. The last poem I read, the unicorn image, was a metaphor, and it was, rather than say, something very prosy like that age-old goal. Well, I wanted it to be more than that, because when it comes down to common ground in America, it is kind of a fantasy, and that's why I went with unicorn. So
now you have a wonderful example of figurative language, of a simile in your poem in Just Passing Through, in that collection, Sunset Over Suburbia.
Well, that one right there, aside from being a motorcyclist, I'm a bicyclist. And that poem in particular was written while I was riding my bicycle through my neighborhood. This is, I live in suburban Charlotte, and, rather than going to highways and all that, I can do like 10, 12 mile loops in my neighborhood. And, I would ride at the end of the day when it's starting to get dark, and this is what I'm picking up on. There's construction going on around here. There's, it's just that kind of, that poem in particular does not require a lot of research. The biggest research that I'm going to do, I'm a feeling kind of poet. I'm an experienced kind of poet. So when I get down, what's beating the experience that's beating me over the head right now has been politics. That's why I have not been writing much, because it tends to all sound alike, after a while. And it just, for me, it just gets me angrier. But the kind of research that I would do is, I'll keep my thesaurus open. I'll keep my, some kind of news network on my computer, so that if to make sure that I've got a quote right, to make sure that, a couple of my poems have been, have epigraphs that are song lyrics. And I'll go to those songs, because you can get them online. You can get all the lyrics, and make sure that I quote it exactly, so I'm not making up words as I go along, at least not somebody else's.
If we can shift for a second and put your publishing, editing hat on, and give advice to the emerging poet about submitting to journals, formulating a cover letter, what advice would you give them?
Well, as somebody who really doesn't care too much about the cover letters, because, you know, everybody, when they do a cover letter, they're going to inflate, you know, they're going to, you know, my greatest hits, my, you know, this is my greatest moments. I would say, number one, make sure your work is ready, and make sure that, that the work speaks for itself. You know, don't send me a poem and then, you know, because we do a lot through Submittable. Don't send me a batch of poems and 5 minutes later send me another batch, say, oh, there was a spelling error in there. I'm not going to judge you on spelling errors. We're going to judge on the quality of the work. So, you know, read the guidelines. That's pretty basic. And, you know, don't skip over. Somebody took time to write that stuff. Now, it may not matter to you, but the fact that they took time to write those guidelines means that they mean something to them.
I know you have published a lot of poetry collections over the past years. Do you have any favorites? I know you're not supposed to.
Wow.
Give me.
Yeah. My children. We did a collection, and you know, it's a real long title. So, oh no, Love Poem to Androgyny. But all of her titles to her poems were like a whole paragraph. But it was a great collection. I mean, and just the title alone gives you an idea what it's about. And it's funny because Tupelo Press took our chapbook and put it into a full-length book. So we no longer sell it, but I was always very proud of that. There are, oh God, I'm trying to think. That one's the one that jumps out the most. Most of our contest winners, like when you go to stick figure with skirt, you know, the concept of it and the way it was delivered. And again, this is one that I think is a great collection. Jeez, I need a list in front of me, because then I can just go down and say, oh, that's another great one. I've published 1,200 books, you know, 1,200, and about 1,000 of them have been poetry books. So kind of tough question for me. But those two really stand out, you know, as far as that goes. And we've had others, like there's one that's up there right now called Deaf and Blind. And we've published, I think this is the 5th of his books that we've published. And the first one was really, really good. It was a finalist in our contest. It got read on American, oh God. They read about 4 or 5 poems on it. Garrison Keillor did. And so he loves this guy's work, but the 2nd through 4th book didn't sell at all. Couldn't sell them at all. Then he comes out with this one, Deaf and Blind, and I was real hesitant to do it because it was a real long book and it mixed prose with poetry. But it was his experience as an interpreter of deaf, you know, he's a signer. This is what he does for a living. So it takes that and it takes different experiences and it shares it with the public who may not be familiar with it.
Hey, Brother Al.
Oftentimes, poets and writers have resources or practices or books that help them or have helped them. Do you have resources or practices or books that you use?
Well, I'll tell you, I had practices. You know, I am, as a lot of people know, I'm an early riser. I mean, I was up today at 3:45. And I just, you know, it used to be the first thing I did was I would sit down and I would write. That was the first thing I did in the morning. And even if it was only for an hour, I would sit down and write. Well, you know, it turns out that is my most productive time of day, is before 9 o'clock. And I have to get out the door at 9 o'clock because in this age of pandemic, I have to go to the post office every day to ship. I'm shipping 30 packages a day. Our online bookstore is selling like crazy. So I have to get packages out the door every day. So if I don't go at 9 o'clock, I'll be there for 2 hours. So that means that time when I'm best at writing is being eaten up by Main Street Rag publishing time. Practices, I think the biggest practice, and I think this is the most important one for anybody, is never be satisfied and say, oh, that's the end product. Always sit down and, rewrite it, read it aloud. If you don't read it aloud, you're going to miss bad phraseology. You're going to when I read it aloud, if I stumble in the same place twice, I know there's a problem there. So as I was reading earlier, I discovered a problem, as a matter of fact.
Constant. It's constant. Have you ever thought of coming out with your own book, a recommendation on writing? Like Mary Oliver's got them, Robert Bly's got them.
Well, I don't put my same in it. I don't put myself in the same atmosphere as people who have actually taught writing, and I have not taught writing, and I don't feel like, since I'm not always. One of the reasons why I'm not circulating a whole bunch of my work right now is because I'm not real satisfied with it. Well, if I can't straighten out my own stuff, then I'm not qualified to be telling somebody else, this is what you need to do, with your work on a regular basis. Now, there's times when I'm reading something, a poem that's been submitted and my poetry editor has rejected it, and I'll look at it and say, there's only one line here. You get rid of this and it's a great poem. And I'll do that. So,
okay. Tim.
Scott, what projects are you working on now, and how can people get hold of your books?
I'll tell you one thing that's hot as hell right now is for the last 2 months, I have an author, Leslie McElroy, up in Pittsburgh, and she's also one of my editors. And when I was up there in the summertime, she pitched this idea to me, and it's a historical book. And another publisher talked to her about it, and she didn't like the attitude or whatever. And I said, well, we can do this. You let me do it, we can do this. And we got some prices and all that. And it's a hardback, which is not something we do a lot of. And it's a coffee table book, but it's a historical book it's called The Red Door. And it's about this bar in Squirrel Hill, which is a part of Pittsburgh. I've never been in this bar. I've been right by it. My family grew up right down the street from it. And this is about the people who went there, the people who worked there, the people who owned it. It's a great book. And it's gotten a lot of press. I mean, this morning, because we sell everything off Main Street Rag's website. I'm not a big fan of Amazon. Why should I give you this amount of money when I'm selling it just fine on my own website? Well, I went to the post office. I came back from the post office. I had 5 more sales. This is a $50 book. It's like, okay, I might have some Christmas gifts this year. But yeah, it's selling like hotcakes. I'm really proud of that. I mentioned Deaf and Blind. I think that is a book that it's going to be used in teaching circles. It's because of how its focus and all that, and because the author he lives up in Boston. He's pretty well known for being an interpreter around there. So this is going to be a real, I think, a good book for the academic scene.
So in terms of how people can get hold of your books, what's the best way?
Well, Just Passing Through is on Amazon because that's published by Paycock Press, but both of them are also available on the Main Street Rag website. So they're both there.
Well, Brother Scott, how about reading us 2 last poems?
Okay. I'll read the longer one first, and if you stick your finger up, I will end with that. This is called Living in the Red State Blues, Part 1. The couple across the street props an old pallet dressed in red, white, and blue like a flag in their front yard, beside another hand-painted sign that reads, "Put God back in America." At Christmas, they host the neighborhood dinner and make everyone hold hands and pray before we eat. A retired Marine, he lays his gun collection across the bed where we store our coats when we arrive. In their not so private hours, we know they curse Obama and witch hunts and chant things like "lock her up" and "build a wall." They go to church each Sunday and Wednesday, sing gospels with other faithful. We decorate our house with blue lights. We decorated our house with blue lights last year and skipped the neighborhood dinner. We knew if the event ran true to form, some neighbors would be wheeled in, others would hobble behind aluminum walkers. All would hold hands and say a group prayer, including praise for the president, then discuss church events, how wonderful the dry ham is, healthcare costs, medications. My hands would have sweat through pretense and piousness. They've fenced facts into a cage in the backyard, feed it only when they can't afford not to. Invite neighbors over once a year to see how well behaved it is, how nicely they decorate this world in which they barricaded themselves. I feel myself building a wall of my own, one day at a time, one brick of truth mortared to another. I'm already the neighborhood heathen. Soon they will cordon me off from the righteous, protect the flock from anything that might disturb the comfort of groupthink. Let me go with this one. This is called Recovery. I hear gravel grind beneath the wheels of a skateboard. The boy across the street kicks into motion. A procession of bikers pass on a country road nearby, their engines rumbling to silence as they fade into the distance. Still grounded after surgery, I open my shop door, find my gloves folded and resting stiff and dry in a lonely helmet. Step up to the bike, straddle the cold leather seat, fire it up one-handed. Listen as it grumbles to life without me.
We want to thank our poet today, M. Scott Douglas, a published poet. He's also, a publisher and an editor. But today we heard from the poet. We want to thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.